went wrong. Shared responsibility for the crisis, shared culpability for the crisis. We all partied and we're all now enduring the hangover. You've heard that kind of speak. And the reason why that matters is because when you look to the political response, and I'm speaking now domestically in the first instance, the political response to the crisis only makes sense when you first understand that it's based on a premise that we're all to blame. And the political response, as we know only too well, has been driven by cutbacks in public expenditure, a resulting economic contraction, deep difficulties for the domestic economy and sectors like retail in particular, and then of course the real crisis that we face, a crisis of unemployment, of joblessness of over 14%. That's been the sum of the political response. And the cutbacks politically only stack up when you work, if you work, and accept the misdiagnosis that sure, everybody was at it and we're all going to have to take the pain. I thought that we had turned a corner perhaps late into the last Dáil term. You remember we had a debate in this on the austerity treaty. You remember that there was a change of French president. Monsieur Hollande took over from Nicolas Sarkozy. And suddenly the talk about growth and the necessity for economic growth and stimulus and activity and jobs came onto the radar. And certainly I finished the last Dáil term under the impression that at least we had moved the conversation from cutbacks and austerity onto a genuine discussion around growth. And I thought that that was modest progress, but progress nonetheless. However, in the course of the last couple of weeks, through Minister James Riley's attempts to impose cutbacks in the health service, but maybe more notably through the utterances of the Fiscal Advisory Council, which stepped up to the plate and said, well, hang on, those cutbacks aren't severe enough, and in fact, we need 1.9 billion in addition in cutbacks and tax hikes. That was their take on it. And then I said to myself, no, we haven't actually won this argument yet, and the penny hasn't dropped as of yet with mainstream political thinkers, and by that I mean the elected representatives, but more to the point, the policy makers, the civil service, the public service, the ones that shape the public administration and public policy. They still are in a space where they believe that simply by brutal cutbacks and austerity we can get ourselves out of the hole that we're in. And the truth is that we can't. And the evidence to date is that we can't. And the reality is that if we continue on this particular policy track, we will cause immense damage in communities, in families, in people's lives, immense damage to the economy, and we will still be in a state of crisis. Now, I don't know how many times shocking live register figures have to be released, or how many times shocking figures around business failures and trauma in the retail sector have to be writ large. How many times that has to happen before the official thinkers in the system here in this state actually wake up to a reality and deal with it in a very honest way. There'd be those who would have been great supporters from the 1980s onwards of the social partnership process and the value of consensus, avoiding industrial turmoil and so on. I'm not proposing to open up that discussion, but I instance it because I want to make a point that I think lies at the heart of our ability to respond to the crisis, and it's this. I think in valuing consensus and industrial peace, what we have done is actually blunt our capacity to think independently. Never mind radically, but to think independently and rationally. I think there has been a predominant view within this state, and it relates to the economy in this case, but in other areas also, which demands conformity. Conformity with a certain orthodox view of what our problem is and how we solve it. And I think that has been to our very great cost. Wind back the tape when the bubble was being inflated, the property bubble, the speculative bubble, and those that questioned at the time the wisdom of that were told that they were naggers and naysayers and headbangers and lulas and you name it. The message was, shut up, leave well enough alone. That was then. Now, as we deal with the fallout of the bubble bursting, there is still that same resistance to any kind of independent, rational, or heaven forbid, radical thought. So those of us that argue the toss and that say that the crude, blunt mechanism of slashing public spending, of hemorrhaging numbers from the public service, of damaging the provision of services, that blunt instrument is damaging and wrong and short-sighted and counterproductive, well, guess what? We're told, be quiet, you don't understand how an economy works, you're naive, you're not prepared to take tough decisions. Now that's the one that really blows my mind. You don't know what tough decisions are. Oh yes, I do. I know how tough it is if you tell a person with disability that their personal assistant hours are being cut or taken away. That's really tough for them. I don't want to hear tears from Cabinet of how distraught they were as they set out to damage another person's life. That really doesn't cut it with me, to be quite frank. But in the course of our discussion here this morning, I think one of the big issues for those of us on the left, for those of us that are progressives, for those of us in whatever walk of life who are absolutely insistent that the living standards and experience of the working class at this, particularly in a time of crisis, must be protected. We need to figure out ways collectively that we challenge that orthodox, that paralysis in thinking. And how do we talk over the heads of those that would wrap us on the neck and say, no, you can't do that, you don't understand? How do we talk to the grassroots, and how do we mobilise a force that in turn challenges by weight of numbers and by strength of conviction and experience that insistence that the bankers and the developers inflated the bubble and caused the chaos, but the family in Cabra or Ballymun is going to pick up the tab. There's a couple of things short term that I think the government will now have to look at. I think they are unanswerable. I think they have to look at the whole issue of a wealth tax. We've been talking about this. I know we're not alone in Sinn Féin. Others have been speaking about this for some time. Makes no sense at this time to be introducing a property tax that takes no account of ability to pay and heap it on the backs of those who have experienced negative equity, and more to the point, those that struggle to pay their mortgages. An administration that on the one hand concedes we have a crisis in terms of mortgage distress, and then in the next breath proposes the property tax as envisaged is an administration in disarray. It doesn't make any sense. What can make sense and what can yield for the exchequer in the short and the long term is a wealth tax, an asset tax that takes account of bonds and shares and stock. And that section of people at the top of the heap chart, you know, the people who have wealth, not the well-off, the wealth holders. That has to be done. And I say that not in a sense of spite or begrudgery, but in the sure knowledge that in any decent democracy and society, it's not just about creating or accumulating wealth. It has to be around the fair distribution of wealth. And it certainly has to be at a time of crisis around those with the deepest pockets and the broadest shoulders carrying their fair share of the burden. I think equally the issue of income tax, the government has said they won't look at increasing levels of income. That is just wrong. In the short term, that is the wrong position. And we've argued for a third band at 48% for individual earnings over €100,000. Will we be hugely popular in some circles for that? No. Would there be people put out by that measure? Yes. But is it fair? Yes. In these times, that is the fair and decent thing to do. But above all, we need to get the debate back centred on the issue of growth and investment in jobs. We are not coming out of any slump or crisis or recession while we have almost 500,000 people on the dole queues. That will not happen. And anybody possessed of an ounce of wit, I don't think you have to be an academic genius or a trained economist to understand that whilst you have that number of people inactive in the economy, that you cause yourself to go deeper into the negative cycle. So we need to get ourselves off the negative cycle and into a positive one. And at the heart of that is investment in growth and jobs. Now, there's no doubt that at a European level, there is a role for the Commission, for the different decision-making bodies to facilitate that and to invest. So far, their attempts have been really laughable. Now, I wouldn't even call it a modest initiative. The initiatives they have taken have been nothing short of a joke for a continent in the grips of an unemployment crisis. So we need activity at the European level, but you cannot credibly politically argue for initiatives at a higher level if you're not prepared to talk the talk and walk the walk yourself within your own jurisdiction. I thought it was interesting when Terry talked about the euro and the fear, and I think you used the word intimidation also around the euro. Will we be thrown out? We cannot be thrown out of the euro. That is just not a possibility. There may be those who would wish to cut us loose and throw us out, but they don't have the legal capacity to do that. I think that there is fear at every level that the euro would crash and burn, and where would that leave us? And I think that's a genuine fear. I think it's well founded, because it would be a step into the unknown, and I accept that. However, I don't believe that that uncertainty should be used as an excuse for not having the conversation and the debate. I certainly don't believe that that fear should be used as a rationale for a government that is intent on further public spending cutbacks and further levying the pain and the cost of the crisis on the backs of the working class, on middle and lower income families and workers. I think that that would be an abuse of the people and a truly disingenuous thing to do. My fear is that that is precisely what will be done politically. We have a lot going for us in this state, in this country. We have a dynamic, talented and fairly skilled population. We have natural resources if we have the wit and the courage to harness them for the collective good. We have a strong history of rebelliousness and challenge. We're probably better rebels than revolutionaries, it has been said. I think that would be true.